In 1898, a 17-year-old boy sat in a cramped workshop in Milan, surrounded by bicycle parts and the smell of machine oil. His father, one of the most celebrated furniture designers in Europe, had enrolled him at the prestigious Brera Academy to study art. The boy lasted about 5 minutes. While his classmates learned to paint and sculpt, he was here, in the back rooms of a bicycle manufacturer called Prinetti and Stucchi, teaching himself how engines worked. His family had produced painters, sculptors, and architects for generations. Everyone expected him to carry on that tradition. But this boy had different ideas. He looked at engines the way his father looked at carved mahogany. He saw beauty in pistons and poetry in gear ratios. And he was convinced, with the kind of certainty only a teenager can have, that he could build machines more beautiful than anything his artistic family had ever created. 3 decades later, his racing cars would win over 2,000 victories in just 5 years. His luxury automobiles would cost more than mansions, and his name would become synonymous with automotive perfection. That boy was Ettore Isidoro Bugatti. This is that story. The Bugatti family of Milan was not your typical bunch. Ettore's father, Carlo, designed Art Nouveau furniture so elaborate that it now sits in museums. His younger brother Rembrandt became one of the most celebrated animal sculptors of the early 20th century. Even his aunt married Giovanni Segantini, one of Italy's great painters. So when young Ettore showed zero interest in traditional art, his family was, let's say, concerned. But they failed to see what the teenager understood instinctively. Machines were art. Engineering was sculpture. And the automobile, still in its infancy in the 1890s, was the most exciting canvas in the world. By 19, Ettore had already designed his first car. By 20, he was working for established manufacturers, learning everything he could while quietly thinking he could do it better. And by 1909, he had scraped together enough money to rent a decommissioned dye works in Molsheim, a small town in the Alsace region that was then part of the German Empire. The factory was modest, the ambitions were not. Ettore Bugatti didn't just want to build cars. He wanted to build rolling works of art that happened to go very, very fast. And here's the thing about Ettore. He was an absolute perfectionist. The kind of person who would reject a part because the screws weren't aligned correctly. The kind of person who would spend extra money on components that no customer would ever see, simply because he knew they were there. When a customer once complained that his Bugatti was difficult to start on cold mornings, Ettore reportedly responded, "Sir, if you can afford a Type 35, you can surely afford a heated garage." When another customer complained about the brakes, Ettore replied, "I make my cars to go, not to stop." The man had opinions, but those opinions produced something remarkable. In 1924, Bugatti unveiled the Type 35 at the French Grand Prix in Lyon. The car was a disaster. Every single one of the 5 Type 35s entered into the race failed to finish. The tyres hadn't been properly vulcanized and they fell apart at high speed. Any normal company would have been humiliated. Bugatti was just getting started. Once they fixed the tyre problem, the Type 35 became the most dominant racing machine the world had ever seen. We're not talking about winning a few races here and there. We're talking about complete and utter annihilation of the competition. At its peak, the Type 35 averaged 14 race wins per week. That's not a typo. 14 wins every single week. Between 1925 and 1929, Bugatti won the Targa Florio, one of the most grueling road races on Earth, 5 years in a row. The Type 35 won the first Monaco Grand Prix ever held. It won the 1926 Grand Prix World Championship. By the end of the 1920s, Bugatti racing cars had accumulated over 2,000 victories. 2,000. The car only weighed about 750 kilograms, produced around 140 horsepower with the supercharger, and looked like something between a torpedo and a religious experience. The Type 35 attracted drivers who would become legends. Louis Chiron, Tassio Nuvolari, Alberto Divo. Even female racing drivers like Helenice and Eliska Junkova chose the Type 35. In 1928, Junkova led the entire field at the Targa Florio for most of the race before mechanical trouble dropped her to 5th. A woman, leading the most brutal road race in Europe in 1928. That's how good the car was. In 1929, Louis Chiron humiliated the German automotive industry on their home turf by winning the Grand Prix of Nations at the newly opened Nürburgring. He finished 12 minutes ahead of the second-place driver. The crowd, which had come expecting a German victory, watched in stunned silence as a French car with an Italian name dominated their national circuit. Ettore famously called the Type 35 the founding father of a family of pure-blooded racehorses from Molsheim. The man knew what he had built, but racing glory wasn't enough for Ettore Bugatti. He wanted to build the ultimate luxury car, something that would make Rolls-Royce look like a Ford, something that European royalty would line up to purchase, something that would cement his legacy as the greatest automotive mind who ever lived. In 1927, he unveiled the Type 41 Royale, and this is where the story starts to go wrong. The Royale was preposterous in the best possible way. It stretched 21 feet long. That's longer than most pickup trucks today. It weighed 7,000 pounds. The engine displaced 12.7 litres and produced 300 horsepower, twice as much as a contemporary Rolls-Royce. The wheels alone were 24 inches in diameter. Ettore planned to build 25 of these monuments to excess and sell them exclusively to royalty. Kings, queens, emperors. The kind of people who could afford a car that cost more than most people's lifetime earnings. There was just one small problem. The Royale debuted in 1929. You might recognize that year. It was the year the global economy collapsed. The Great Depression didn't care about Ettore Bugatti's dreams. European royalty suddenly had more pressing concerns than buying 21-foot automobiles. The King of Spain had ordered a Royale. By the time it was ready, he had been deposed in a civil war and was no longer in the market for luxury vehicles. In the end, Bugatti built only 6 Royales. He sold exactly 3. The irony? Ettore kept the unsold engines and installed them in high-speed railcars for the French National Railway. The engines that were supposed to power kings now hauled commuters. The project that was meant to crown his legacy became one of his most notable failures. But Ettore had something more important than the Royale. He had his son. Jean Bugatti was born in 1909, the same year his father founded the company. From childhood, he practically lived in the Molsheim factory. While other kids played with toys, Jean watched mechanics assemble racing cars. By his early 20s, he was designing vehicles himself. And he was good, really good. But Jean was also his own man. He clashed with his father over engineering decisions. Ettore despised independent front suspension, believing it compromised the purity of his designs. Jean, recognizing that times were changing, secretly built a prototype with independent suspension and gave it the code name Crème de Menthe, so his father wouldn't find out. When Ettore eventually discovered the project, he was furious. He declared the car was no longer a Bugatti and banned his son from using the design in production vehicles. It was the eternal struggle between tradition and innovation, played out in an automobile factory in rural France. At just 21 years old, Jean designed the body of the Royal Esdes Roadster. At 27, he designed the Type 57 SC Atlantic, a car with flowing curves and a riveted dorsal fin that still looks like it's from the future nearly 90 years later. The Atlantic's shape was so radical that the aluminum panels couldn't be welded together. Instead, Jean created a raised seam running down the spine of the car, turning a manufacturing limitation into a design signature that made the car unforgettable. Only 4 Atlantics were ever built. Today, they're worth tens of millions of dollars each. By 1936, Ettore was tired. Factory strikes had worn him down. He retreated to Paris and handed control of the company to his 27-year-old son. Jean was ready. He had the design talent, the engineering knowledge, and the racing pedigree. Under his leadership, Bugatti won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1937 and again in 1939. The future looked bright. Then came August 11th, 1939. If you're enjoying this, hit subscribe. I cover stories like this every week about the rise and fall of legendary companies. Now back to the worst day in Bugatti history. Jean had just won Le Mans again. The Type 57 tank that took victory at the Sarthe was back at the Molsheim factory, and Jean wanted to test it on the nearby roads. It was evening, around 10 o'clock. The stretch of highway between Molsheim and Strasbourg had been closed for the test. Guards were posted at each end. Everything was controlled. Jean made several runs with his racing director Robert Aumaitre in the passenger seat. The car was performing beautifully. Then Jean asked to do one final run alone. Aumaitre stepped out. What happened next changed everything. Somehow, a cyclist made his way onto the closed road near the village of Duppigheim. Some accounts say he was drunk, others say he simply wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. Jan was travelling at high speed when the cyclist appeared. He swerved to avoid the man. The Type 57 tank slammed into a tree. John Bugatti was thrown from the vehicle. He was 30 years old. According to Ettore's daughter, the cyclist was so consumed by guilt that he committed suicide 3 years later. Whether that's true, we don't know. What we do know is that Jean's death destroyed his father. Ettore never recovered. He had built an empire, but he had also built it around a single successor. With Jean gone, there was no one to carry the torch. Less than a month after Jean's death, World War II began. The Nazis occupied France. The Molsheim factory, which had been Ettore's home for 30 years, was seized. In 1941, to prevent the company from being sold at auction, Ettore was forced to sell it himself for 150 million francs. That was half of what it was worth. After the war, things got even worse. In the feverish atmosphere of post-liberation France, anyone who had cooperated with the Germans was suspect. Ettore, who was Italian-born and had sold his factory during the occupation, was charged with collaboration. His property was seized. His life's work, already in ruins, was taken from him. On June 20th, 1947, a French court finally acquitted Ettore Bugatti and ordered his property restored. It was a complete vindication. The charges had been baseless. The man who had given so much to French motorsport and industry was innocent. Ettore never knew. He had suffered a stroke months earlier and remained in a coma at the American hospital in the Paris suburb of Neuilly. He died on August 21st, 1947, almost certainly unaware that his name had been cleared. Just 2 months after his vindication, the man who had built an empire was gone. He was 65 years old. The Bugatti company struggled on for a few more years under Ettore's other son, Roland. They attempted a comeback with the Type 251 race car in the mid-1950s, designed with help from Gioacchino Colombo, one of Ferrari's legendary engineers. The car was meant to restore Bugatti to Grand Prix glory. It failed completely. The Type 251 never won a single race. The company that had once averaged 14 victories per week couldn't manage one. They made one last appearance at the Paris Motor Show in 1952. Then they gave up. In total, over 47 years, Bugatti had produced approximately 7,900 cars. That's fewer than Ford makes in a single day today. The company was eventually purchased in 1963, but only for its airplane parts business. The automobile production that Ettore had dedicated his life to was considered worthless. The factory at Molsheim sat abandoned. The racing victories faded into history. The name Bugatti became a legend, a memory, a story about what might have been. And somewhere out there, Jean Bugatti's personal Atlantic, a car he called La Voiture Noire, remains missing. It vanished during World War II and has never been found. Automotive historians have searched for decades. The car, if it still exists, would be worth well over $50 million. It's fitting somehow. A ghost car from a ghost company, built by a man who died too young, for a family that lost everything. The Bugatti brand would eventually be revived. First in the 1990s by an Italian entrepreneur, then by Volkswagen in the 2000s, who used the name to build hypercars like the Veyron and Chiron. Today, there's even a factory back in Molsheim. But that's a different story. A corporate story about brand licensing and German engineering. The real Bugatti, the one Ettore built with his bare hands and impossible standards, the one Jean was supposed to inherit, the one that won 2,000 races and built cars for kings, that Bugatti ended on a road near Duppigheim when a drunk cyclist wandered into the wrong lane. 14 race wins per week, 21-foot limousines for royalty, the most beautiful cars ever designed, and it all came down to one moment, one swerve, one tree. Ettore Bugatti once said, "Nothing is too beautiful, nothing is too expensive." In the end, the price was his son, his company, and his legacy. If this story stuck with you, check out the video on screen. It's another tale of ambition, tragedy, and what happens when empires crumble.